G'day, Professor Joseph Drew here. I've been on the radio recently defending local government. Now, local government does do things that we don't agree with from time to time, but they're not the basket case that's currently being presented in the media. They're a convenient scapegoat for inept state and federal politicians, and in this video I'll set this story straight. So if you want to listen to the ABC radio program that I spoke at yesterday, here's the link on the screen. I start at 1:48:25. It's the whole 3-hour program. I'm sure you don't want to listen to the whole lot. But the point is, I'm getting much more media interest invitations to come and speak on radio about why are rates going up? What are these inefficient councils doing? Why do they have to put up their costs so much? And a lot of it's based on misinformation and confusion. A lot of it's deliberately planted by state politicians. They want to take the attention away from their own very large policy mistakes over the last 2.5, 3 years. In fact, it's been the worst public policy disaster that I've seen in my lifetime. And of course, they want to take the attention away from their own financial mismanagement and their own financial unsustainability. And convenient scapegoat has always been local government. It's a tried and true heuristic maneuver. Heuristic is the term that William H. Riker, the great political scientist, came up with to explain the types of political games that state politicians particularly, and also federal politicians, like to play at local government's expense. So the truth of the matter is, the question was posed to me in the ABC radio interview, these natural disasters, that must be what's putting up costs. Well, no, what's putting up costs are our public policy disasters, and it's been one after another. In Queensland and in New South Wales, my research is showing conclusively that the amalgamation programs in both of those states were fiscal disasters. That increases the cost. In New South Wales, unit costs have gone up by about 11%. That increases the cost year after year. It gets compounded, and someone has to pay the cost. And the people who pay the cost is your local community, who are forced to pay additional local government taxation, which we call rates in Australia. So that's one public policy disaster. Another was the absolutely insane rate caps that we came out with at the beginning of this year in New South Wales and Victoria, 0.7%, and I think it was 1.7% in Victoria, leading into a high inflation environment when we knew, even the RBA had recognised for some time, that inflation was going to be at least 6%. Of course, it's going to be a lot higher than that in the forthcoming year. You cannot approve a rate increase of 0.7% for the forthcoming financial year when you know that inflation is going to top 7% and expect local governments to stay financially sustainable. You're effectively giving them a real cut to their rate revenue of at least 6.3% in New South Wales. In Victoria, at least 5-point-something%. Obviously, that's going to damage their financial sustainability. They were bad decisions because for a long time, Australians haven't had to think about inflation. But we made some really bad public policy mistakes over the last 2.5 years, and now we will constantly be thinking about inflation and bearing the cost of the inflation. And local government will also bear that cost. So that was another public policy disaster. The chaotic grants, the financial assistance grants, which are meant, the legislation says it allows every council in this nation, if they exert reasonable effort, to provide a basic standard of services to their communities. That is a failure. I know it's a failure because I live in a rural area where my council can't provide basic services like bitumen roads and the like. And then I travel down to Sydney occasionally for work, and I see councils that have beautiful bitumen roads and adventure playgrounds for their citizens, and great big entertainment facilities and money to burn, essentially. So clearly the horizontal fiscal equalisation of the objective of our legislation for our grants is not being met. the grants, the money from the Commonwealth Government is not being allocated in a fashion that allows every Australian to have a fair go. That's what the legislation's for. We've got the State Grants Commission all beating to their own drum, all doing chaotic and empirically indefensible things, and it is communities that are suffering. It means in Australia you don't get a fair go because of inept and incompetent performance. We've got cost shifting. It's always happening from the state governments and also sometimes from the federal government. It's been turbocharged of late with these stimulus programs to stimulate the economy after the disastrous public policy mistakes that were made during COVID. The fact of the matter is that local government has borne most of that cost. State governments have handed over money, pushed money at you to do projects. By the time you sign a contract to do the project already costs more than what you received in grants. Who picks up the tab for the gap? Local residents. So, yes, natural disasters are a problem, but public policy disasters are a much bigger problem for our local governments. Yeah, and the other thing to think about is, yes, we have a lot of financially unsustainable local governments in Australia, and that's a real problem, and that's morally wrong for our children and our grandchildren, and it's economically undesirable to be in a state of financial unsustainability, and we need to address it. And if your local government is putting up rates, well, they're actually doing the responsible and prudent thing. Now, I wish our higher tiers of governments, our state governments and federal governments, were doing the responsible and prudent thing, because they're not. They're not even trying to become financially sustainable. If you look at the federal government spending charts from their budget papers, you can see they intend all the way to 31, 32 and beyond to be spending more money than they take in revenue, to be piling more debt onto our children and grandchildren. That is their intention. That is their best case scenario. Imagine what their worst case scenario is. It is morally and economically indefensible to act like this. Indeed, it's one of the things causing this inflation problem that we have, which is a problem also for local government. So at least a lot of our local governments are aware of financial sustainability. A lot of our local governments, I know, are trying to become financially sustainable. They're talking to me to get the work done that needs to be done to get to that state. I can't say the same thing for our federal government. It's not sustainable. And I'm not sure that they're even interested in becoming sustainable. So they have lots of fun bagging local governments all the time, but their own fiscal record is not good. Certainly the Queensland state government, which we led with in this video, is a very poor record. But here's another one. Here's the New South Wales forward projections. Remember the fit for the future, and you had to meet these financial ratios to show that you're fit for the future? Well, New South Wales state government is not fit for the future by their own metrics. It's as simple as that. So they're holding local governments to standards which they're not being prepared to be held to themselves. Now, the forward estimates show that eventually New South Wales hopes to eventually be pulling in sufficient revenue to cover their expenses, but it's over a long period, and it's just not fair to the next generation of taxpayers to behave like this. So if we're going to bag local government, we need to also apply the same standards to our state governments and our federal governments. And if we do, we're probably going to have to bag them much more heavily than what we do with our local governments. And I'm not saying local government's perfect. From time to time, they do really stupid things, and I usually criticise them when they do. And but there's 500 odd in Australia, and these really stupid things are quite isolated cases. And sometimes you see local governments with bad behaviour, but once again, look at our state governments. This is a whole heap of storming out, having a great big sulk from our state government parliament in New South Wales. Their behaviour is not exactly edifying. Their behaviour probably wouldn't be accepted in most local government chambers. So if we want to bag local government, fine, let's hold our state politicians and our federal politicians to the same standards. And yes, councils waste money from time to time. and I wish they wouldn't. I always counsel them not to. And if anyone wants to check whether something's a good idea, hop on the telephone, give me a ring, and I'll tell you whether it is or isn't. I'll give you unbiased advice. Unfortunately, when you go to consultants, you get very biased advice because all they're interested in is your money, not your community. I am interested in your community, so if you ever want unbiased advice, hop on the phone. But okay, so councils do stupid things from time to time, but I'm not aware that our councils, any of them, have spent $5.5 billion for something that they're never going to get, like we did with the submarines. There's so many examples. The NBN, I think we just spent $25 million to put the Aboriginal flag on the Harbour Bridge. There's lots of examples of state and federal governments doing really, really stupid and wasteful things. I believe Queensland built a COVID quarantine facility after the COVID thing disappeared, or we no longer cared about it, that cost millions of dollars to keep running, even though it's not being used. Local government is probably your most fiscally responsible tier of government, and not probably, it is. They usually run pretty tight ships. There's not much being wasted at all. They come under a lot more scrutiny than state governments and federal governments, and that's good. That's a good thing. This is why I believe more should be done by local government, because people are more in touch with what's happening in their local community. But out of the three tiers of government, your most fiscally responsible, transparent, and accountable tier of government is actually local government. So you want to go bagging local government, fine. Hold your state and federal governments to account at the same standards. That's all I'm saying. And really, if we want to have a better future, if we want to have financially sustainable government, if we don't want to leave trillions of dollars of debt to our children and our grandchildren, if we don't want to have authoritarian and dictatorial decrees like we lived through for years and years and years, if we don't want to have public policy disaster after public policy disaster like we've lived through for the last decade, well, the hope is that local government gets more responsibilities and does more, because they do a better job. I know that's a very inconvenient fact for our media who like to bag local government, and a very inconvenient fact for our state parliamentarians, our federal parliamentarians that would love people to look anywhere other than at their financial sheets. But the fact of the matter is that our local governments do a better job. They are more fiscally responsible. I want them to be better. I'm starting a short course shortly teaching local governments more about financial sustainability and why it's important from a moral and economic sense and how to get there. I want them to be better. But at present, if we've got a problem in government, it's not all centered on local government. We just need to be realistic and honest about matters. So, look, if you found this video helpful, please use it in any way you like. That's why it's under my own name. If you want to put it on your website, if you want to flick it around, please do so. We need to get the message out. So many people are confused by so many things. You know, another thing is these ASVs. People can't tell the difference between an ASV and an SRV, and the whole system was silly anyway. It was bound to lead to confusion, and that confusion has been made worse by some of the peak bodies who are also using the terms interchangeably when they were completely different processes. So there's so much confusion out there. There's never been a more important time to get people having correct facts and understanding issues in a reasonable way. So if these videos can serve that purpose, please use them any way that you feel is consonant with that objective. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.